Howdy, howdy. This is Daniel Markham. I'm at danielbmarkham.com. Today we're going to do some technical nerdy stuff, and I've got Greg Young, and we're going to talk about a code smell called primitive obsession. Greg, so far the technology is working, so I expect it to fail any minute since it's working for like a whole 10 seconds now. It's bound to fail at any seconds. So if you'll allow me, Greg, I would like to set up the topic. That'd take about a minute or two. If that's okay. Okay. Um, that's crap. Let's see, where were we? Okay, so over here I have the code editor. I have a C# app open, and I have some really convoluted, complex code. Integer I equals 1, integer j equals 2, integer k equals I plus j. Now, the int here is what's called a primitive type. I'm not trying to be pedantic with folks who think that they're beyond this, but there's an important point to be made here. If you use these integers in your code, dang it, the code will never fail. The type of integer is complete over the system operations the program will perform on it. But not exactly, because you could divide by 0, in which case you throw a nan, and that would have the system operate on the integer in such a way that the system would fail. Now, the deal is the primitive types are as locked in as possible to never fail. They're not perfect, but they're locked in as much as we can. We made the decision early on that divide by 0 was something that programmers
I'm sorry, but there were certain Pentium chips that disagreed with that statement.
Yes, the Pentiums. Okay, so the important point being is primitives are much more rock solid. The line 6 here, or line 5, has integer customer's age 32. Now, I added, this may seem, like I said, this may seem quite pedantic, but it's not. When I added customer's age in, I'm starting to associate something in the real world with this integer. The other lines are just simply context-free. It's just math. It can mean any 1 apple, 2 apples. It really doesn't matter what it is. But here on line 5, I've said customer's age equals 32. I'm associating this symbolic concept with a real-world thing. Now, a couple of things happen here. First of all, I can use that customer's age anywhere I can use a normal int, and it works fine. It will never crash except for the divide by 0. But the second thing is even more interesting. Simply because the integer type is complete over the domain of operations the compiler program can perform on it, doesn't mean that the customer's age is valid at all times, because it refers to a real-life person. Customer's age, for instance, could never be 2,000, because people don't live to be 2,000 years old. Nor could customer's age be -1. So by associating a physical real-world thing with this integer primitive type, I've done two things. First of all, I've started down the road something called domain-driven design, which means I create a system of symbols inside the program that represents a system of real-world things, and I can reason about the program by looking at the labels. And the second thing is I'm starting to build very slowly more complex types by adding labels and grouping together primitive types. So far we good, Greg?
Yep.
Okie dokie. So then we come to the code smell here. Yeah.
Well, there's one really important thing to add here.
Okay.
And this is more from a DDD perspective, that it's very important that these types are immutable.
Yes.
And they can only be created in a valid way.
A lot of things become really important when you start assembling primitive types that are not evident to the programmer assembling those types into a more complex type. I could join together customer's age, customer's name, 3 or 4 very primitive types and call it customer, and have a lot of really obscure little edge cases, such as the age concept, that's not clear from simply looking at the structure customer and the 3 or 4 primitive types underneath that.
Well, and we might also have business rules associated, like a customer must be over 18.
Yes, and those business rules might change based on the operation you're currently doing. So we will take customer leads for anybody over 16, but we only sign up people for our accounts if they're over 21, for instance. In that case, there's no such thing as a valid customer age. It varies depending on which type of customer you're dealing with.
Which business are you modeling here? Is this Drizzly?
I don't know. You got to be 21. A car rental, maybe. I don't know. So this leads us to the code smell of a primitive obsession, and I will try to explain this in a way because it is a real thing, and you should be careful with it. But I think it's people really overdo this too much. So here a guy has a public Boolean authenticate, takes a username and password, and he talks about how validations are a non-empty password. I'm going to go over here in a second. Validations are a non-empty password, and length and it's their validations for this method, public Boolean authenticate. So pretty common business scenario right there. He's got a user create with some variables here as well. Now, what he's saying is that once you start taking types out, in other words, once you move from customer age back to integer I or j, or just once you move to just integer instead of having a named type, then it becomes much more complex inside the function you're using, and can also like leak to the rest of the code and become a complete nightmare because if you're just going to pass, you're just going to pass an integer around.
What happens if you have an age of -300?
Right. It might make sense if you were doing time travel in one part of the business, but if the other part, probably not so much.
This sounds like a rather interesting business model.
Yeah, It's life began 300 years before conception. I'm not sure, but if it does, then we got a whole bunch of people we got to worry about already. So the argument here is that programmers who don't know what they're doing as well as other programmers can start using primitive types to pass off the functions. And maybe that's okay with one or two functions, but it can quickly get out of hand and become a mess throughout the code. By the way, I completely agree with this, but I think the real problem here is that there is this assumption that programmers can create this ultimate customer or password or whatever class, and that will work for every business operation. And that's simply not true. And not only is it not true, but it appears to be true to the maintenance guy who just sees the label customer's age or whatever, even though it may be untrue in a dozen different ways sprinkled throughout the rest of the system. So to fix this, my suggestion is you create a domain-driven design for a particular business behavior that has value to the business, and then you know that you're locking in the types to whatever you're supposed to be doing for that guy who's paying you. And then if your types stop working with the rest of the code, that's a business discussion because he's already told you the things he wanted to have happen for your code. And if his types don't match up with the guy next door's types, well, it is a business problem, not a system problem.
Right.
So in a good business, as you begin using domain-driven design to model out what your objects are, it should be informing you to have business conversations with bunches of folks, all of the organization perhaps. Either that, or you're going to have to scope down to just one business behavior. There's one, you got to pick one of the two, but you can't kind of go in between and pretend like you got it all nailed.
Well, and you have to be very careful with value objects. In terms of scoping them, let me give a concrete example.
Sure.
Money.
You're going to give me money?
Well, we could probably do that. But
let me give you here's $20, kid.
How do you represent money?
Yes. Well, that's a really good question. The naive way I think would probably be, well, this is a good type-oriented question. Naive way might be a string. And then you might move from string to go, wait a minute, I need to have some decimals, so maybe you go to like an integer, divide by 100. I've seen that done. I've seen people try to use floats. Oh, God. But eventually, hopefully, you run across a primitive called the decimal class that most programming languages have that's designed for fixed decimal operations. But
what currency is it in?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
How do the currencies relate to each other?
Right. But here's the real question. Do I need to worry about all of the currencies currently in existence in the known universe? Or am I writing a program for a guy who's selling apples downtown in U.S. dollars?
And oh dear, we haven't even gotten into barter yet.
Haven't gotten to barter, right? But we're really good at thinking up a bunch of bullshit that we never need. Oh my God, I'm awesome at that. I mean, we could do this. So we could have cryptocurrency. We've got barter. We've got various currencies. We've got price changes over time. We can do currency arbitrage, and this is just selling apples.
This is a real issue in many domains. Well, I was going to say, if you are actually trading, suddenly currency becomes a really, really important concept.
It does, but the idea that that is a very important concept is a business idea, not a system idea. This is where we get fucking wrapped around the tree over and over again. Now, I agree with you that if you're running a business on the web and you're doing currency, oh my God, there's a lot of issues you should consider, and this, that, and the other thing.
Oh, no. On the web, this would be no problem at all. I'm thinking about trading.
The Apple Comdex,
I'm thinking about I have prices coming off of a market.
Ginger.
I'm working with 4 different markets.
Sure.
What currency they're in is actually really, really important.
It would be in that scenario, but the thing is that is a business dependent scenario, right? So this is what we do. We and I do it just as much as anybody else, is that we extrapolate one business scenario into every issue to do with coding, and that's God knows that's nowhere near being true.
Well, of course not. And what we should be focused on is what is important to us.
Right.
So if you're working on an algo trading system, currency might be very, very important for you.
Yes. Well,
if you're working on a system that is selling widgets online, it's probably less important to you.
So I agree with you, but I'm gonna kind of clamp down a little more on this. Okay, so you're giving me titles of businesses, and I agree that that's a general kind of swag at things, but what I specifically said is for a particular business feature or function inside a type of business that you can and should build strong immutable types to understand and work with what the business needs to do, and perhaps another function or feature in that same business type, you may need different types for that. So what we've been doing, the problem with this primitive obsession code smell is it assumes that somehow we're modeling this entire either current business or type of business or whatever, and just nobody that smart, man. Nobody keep that in their head, and it's going to have holes and it's going to crash.
Well, and you get into the fun outlier conditions with primitives.
Yeah, we just showed that integers can crash when you do divisions. Don't get me started on floats, because floats, if you would like to go down a rabbit hole of, oh my God, how complicated can we make things? Look up the RFC for floats from the IEEE. It's a hunk of burning fun. The long and short of what I'm saying about floats is that a float, by not having a particular exact number it corresponds to, because you can have a number and an exponent, we had to do all this kind of weird jumbling around. What happens with that last digit? Does it round up or round down? We had a lot of issues with floats, and most of the time they're all gone, but sometimes you can see them pop up in calculators, and it's always fun.
So I just want to throw out a quick paper for everyone who might be listening. What every computer scientist should know about floating point math.
And so my point.
I can't share my screen here, but
yeah,
it's absolutely worth the evening read. And it will scare you.
There we go. Yeah. There you go. Yes, it is. Lots of fun there. So the guys who tell you to be careful with primitive obsession are coming at this from the semantic angle. They're coming at from looking at this label like customer age, like we had before, and they're saying, hey, look, if you throw a bunch of primitives all over the place, it no longer maps to things in the real world, and you have different validations and different functions, and it's a disaster. And I completely agree with that. However, if you come at it from the other side, we can screw things up with one primitive called a float. Now just try joining about 50 of those together into any sort of reasonable complex business class and pop that rest, go around and see what happens. It's a disaster.
Well, and we see it all the time in our bugs, where you end up with a bug that, when you come down to it, you realize that the customer's age was negative 2 billion.
Yes. But nobody thought of that.
And it's like, well, how the hell did I get here?
Yes. And the normal answer, and see, I struggled with this for a while. I was working on the second book, and I was talking about how to be a better programmer. And my natural conception of types was that, okay, well, we'll make a customer class, customer type that we'll share, all the apps will share, and put the validation in there for can't be 2 billion, and then I'll never have to look at that problem again. And the more that sounds very reasonable, but then the more I thought about it, I'm like, well, maybe they're going to deal with dinosaurs at some point. I do not know what I do not know, and I shouldn't really worry about it either. So, yeah.
There becomes a point where constraining your current problem is much better than leaving open future possibilities.
So, yeah, I'll give you a good example here. Michael Feathers and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. And we were talking about the Unison programming language. And if you haven't heard of Unison, the idea behind Unison is if you have a pure functional language with immutable data and types, you can actually represent a function by a hash. And it's always going to do the same thing because it's immutable. You know what it is. And I can just give you the hash and you can use the function and not have to worry about it.
Right.
So if I have, say, a thing on an event bus that I'm just pulling events off, sign up events or whatever, and I write a method to sign up a person, and I have one hunk of code that makes sure that the data is okay to sign up a person, which is my ATTD test, another hunk of code that signs a person up, the two validate one another. The language doesn't matter. None of that shit matters, because if you start sending me stuff that doesn't sign up code, the test will fail, and then I'll rewrite the test and open the code, just like I would with a monolith. Except for, in my case, I may not care about their age or any of those other 49 types on your complex type, because all I really care about is your username and email.
You already know me well enough that I would much prefer just be a theorem mover.
Yes. And that's really fun. I guess what we're kind of describing.
I won't even let you compile that code.
I don't see why you have to, really. Matter of fact, we could easily be at a point where we just pass hashes around, and that would be fine. Wouldn't it be wonderful, like, to have a legacy system where you have the tests and operations like that, and it's like, okay, guys, here are the tests. You guys write me some new operations to go do that.
That has been pretty much the pipe dream for many, many years.
Well, not only is it the pipe dream, but if you're doing migration, you find out pretty quickly you're stuck doing that anyway. So used to get this all the time. People say, okay, we're migrating complex system A to complex system B. How do we do that? And the only answer that makes any sense is, dude, you got to start writing some tests, man. You got to write a lot of tests. Because if you get the test working, it really doesn't matter anything else.
In dealing with migrations in particular, one thing I have found that has been very running as early as possible. I don't care if you fail on 90% of the things that are being migrated.
Yeah.
What I want to know is, where are you in that migration?
Yes. I think that there's not writing tests, number one, going for the big bang, number two. There's like a list of things that seem intuitive that you should not be doing. So here is a guy, this next page here, primitive session, he has a class customer, public string name with a get and setter, email, get and setter. These are both private. Then he has a customer full name. And he says, the problem here is that when you want to enforce validation rules specific for your domain, you inevitably end up putting validation logic all over your source code. Now, listen to the difference in what I said and what he's saying, okay? He's saying, if you want to enforce validation rules specific to your domain, you have to scatter that crap everywhere. What I said was, if you only create a domain for one thing, you don't have to worry about that. I'm telling you the opposite, with exact opposite. This guy's saying make your domain work no matter where you use it. I'm saying pick a spot to use it and then create your domain.
Absolutely.
So it's the reverse here. And if you're trying to do this one domain to rule them all shit, and God bless you, bless your heart, as we say in the South, go forward with that. You're going to have to do this incrementally, kind of locking things down, and it be. I have a hard time telling people, hey, dude, you can't write 10 lines of code without putting a bug in it, which is true. And then on the other hand, say, but you can create like a 40,000 line class graph that's somehow going to magically work. It's like, no, fuck, if you can't do the 10 line piece of code, there's no way the other ones are going to work either.
The really big problem I tend to see in people who are building up domains is they like to make a shared context
Yes.
of what I might call common objects, like name or address.
Yes, very much so.
And then they reuse them through a whole series of domains.
Yes.
The problem is that they don't actually exist as the same concept between all of those different domains.
No, you could have two coders on the same damn problem sitting side by side in the same code base, and that concept will mean different things to them. Much less the guy who in a different city, right? You're trying to use the same app. It's bizarre.
Well, and you end up with these super types. And these super types often come off to subtypes.
Yes.
So I have my company address, and I want to convert that to a my company, my service.
Yes, these objects like my company from New Zealand address zip code. And then, of course, you have to have a factory object to create one of these things.
A factory? Come on. We have a factory of factories.
So I did a piece of code about a year ago, and I had this idea. I would take the census data and make a random person generator. So what's the percentage of first names, top 1,000 first names, top 1,000 last names? And that was cool. I did that. And I'm like, okay, let's find the top 1,000 zip codes. And I just wanted to do a distribution that matched the national distribution.
Oh, man, you should have brought credit reports of this.
You can go on. It's fun.
You could probably sell it at this point.
But I thought, I'll put zip code in, because once I get zip code, I can key off of that to a bunch of other stuff. Turns out the Census Bureau has their own special zip code that's not the same as the post office zip code. It's like, holy cow, why would you reinvent the zip code concept? And I'm sure they had a good reason, but you just can't map one over the other. There's a whole separate Census Bureau zip code concept that I'm sure dozens of programmers right now understand.
I have not had the joy of dealing with that one.
Well, we used to get this thing where people would ask sales tax. That was an old one. So you're selling something online and somebody buys it, and he's on 10 Main Street. Well, 10 Main Streets in City A, 20 Main Streets in City B, and they have completely different sales tax structures. Good stuff.
Yeah, there's another really fun one with addresses that most people have probably not run into. Are you familiar with rural routes?
Yes, growing up in the rural South, I am familiar with that.
Rural routes are the death of any form of address validation.
Oh my God! So yeah, rural route. I was rural route 272J when I was a kid, and basically it's just there's a guy who drives rural route 2, and we're the 272nd. I don't know what the J part is, but if there were different guys who switched the route up a different way, it would be a different address.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, fun stuff.
And trying to validate where that address actually is next to impossible.
Well, I think the funny thing is that what you said earlier, it just still tickles me, is that we try to superclass or subclass our way out of this issue whenever there's a conflict. When I talked about like doing domain-driven design for a particular business behavior, I implicitly meant that if that type structure did not work for that behavior, we have a business problem that needs addressing, which I believe to be true. If you're going the domain route and you have some conflict with the guy next door who's doing a different behavior, we by default, we don't want to bother the business guys. We'll just create a super class we'll figure out some way with objects and classes to make this thing work, and we'll move on forward. We don't have to have a conversation.
So one of my biggest problems I've run into was we were dealing with addresses for police reports. And we thought when we were going through analysis and everything else that, a place has an address.
One would think so.
Whereas what the officer is writing is it's the third house on the left past this intersection.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They ran into
Well,
that.
we were obviously unable to verify this as being a valid address.
The EHR, electronic health record guys, right? The same thing with doctor reports. They thought the doctors would have this thing. They did. Instead, they got, ugly, sniffs nose a lot. It was random stuff from each doctor that made sense to them.
Well, and it makes sense to another doctor when they read it.
Yeah.
But in terms of coding, it makes no sense whatsoever.
But we're all too happy to force it into something that makes some kind of sense for us so that we can process it.
Well, but
I don't think we should, but I'm just saying that we're happy to do that.
A major market move over the last 20 years is trying to get the humans to put things into a standardized format so that we can actually derive information off of it. I might say that your shirt is blue. Someone else might say that your shirt
teal.
Is azure.
I was very.
Are we saying the same thing?
I was very sad. About 5 or 6 years ago, I went to see my GP, my general practice physician, and he stopped being able to speak, which was a very sad thing for me. He came into the room, he sat down, and he said, "Okay," and he would just do these ahs. He would start a sentence and stop. It took the second visit before I figured out he was just trying to fill out the stupid form on the tablet they had given him, and at the same time, but he sounded like his brain no longer worked. I was like, "Oh man, they're gonna put this guy at the pasture or something." But he was just trying to figure the damn interface out.
Well, he would have had a much easier time if he had just asked you for help.
I see. This is a really interesting conversation because where we run with this, especially with your police idea and the doctor thing, is how much structure do we need to put around data in order to pull value out and provide value to other people?
Well, I think that there's a happy medium.
There is. And I have my scoping is important business behavior for a particular person who's paying me. That I have a scope, right? But if you're not accepting that, then there's the model of the universe on one side, and there's on the other side, there's everything's unstructured. Let's just pull some patterns out and throw them at people.
Well, and there's something that really needs to be discussed here, which is we're coming into a new project, which we don't really understand that well, which is we should probably start unstructured and build in structure over time.
See, this is what I completely agree with you, and this, to me, this is the saddest part about this entire conversation, is that we have built these wonderful tools about reasoning about types that we can use in everyday conversation with people. We can start sketching things out. Okay, well, the customer has many addresses, whatever, and we can get better questions by having those conversations. We can create little shared models and have conversations. That doesn't mean that it has to be code. We can make decisions based on little sketches on napkins, and then we can start coding, starting with the minimum amount possible and then growing complexity out. And by the way, as we start coding, whatever we build, it's never going to look like the little thing we sketched out before. It's never ever, if you do it the right way, it never works out that way.
And having consulted on many, many DVD-based projects, what I would like to see a lot more is people who come in and actually don't start with a model. They start with something that just kind of works in a very, very loose way. And then they harden the model.
Yes.
So how are people actually using this?
They're using it, yes. And you prove out the importance, correct. It is trivial. We've got this, here's this one example. This guy creates a type of customer. Everybody does customer. He does a customer. It is quite trivial to create a complex type with a name on it, and it looks as if you've done all this sort of thinking, figuring out. It's much more difficult to say, okay, where is the middle part I need to start at, and then, like you said, grow out a solid piece of functionality as I work. That's a more difficult thing to do.
Well, the other thing that really bothers me when I watch people making types is they tend to focus on what is the data associated with this type as opposed to what is the behavior associated with this type.
Yes. And I think that's the big. A lot of this I'm sharing with you now, I would not have said 10 years ago. And a lot of this comes from programming in a functional manner because it forced me to think in like, okay, what do these types control the program to do as opposed to what goes in this type that I can reason about later on. These are different things to do.
So for everyone listening, I'm going to give them a really, really simple piece of advice. You are not allowed to expose any state from an object. You can only have behaviors.
Yeah.
If you follow that, you will start learning object-oriented programming.
Yes, it will. I agree with that. Except perhaps maybe polymorphism. I was talking to the Bobster. Of course, talked with the Bobster several times about this, and the way you do a match, sort of a case match situation in an imperative program, is you say, okay, I've got a customer coming in. If his age is greater than 20 or whatever, I do this. And maybe have a switch case in the old C. But then the old guys, no, wait a minute, we can use polymorphism. We'll just have any sort of object that represents a customer will also have an object that represents a person. And that person will have a is old enough method that validates it. So what they try to do is remove the concept of reasoning about a level or twos, and then you pass that through a switch statement, and bada boom, bada bing.
No, but you don't pass it through a switch statement.
Well,
you just use polymorphism.
Right, you just use a function call.
Right.
To query state. Now, see, that to me, when I heard that, I guess in the 90s, that was a beautiful thing. So, oh, wow, we can have this other piece of class, and that can handle the validation. But then I got to look at pattern matching in Haskell and OCaml and F Sharp, and I'm like, oh, damn, this is the way we should have been doing this shit all the time. Because I have a type that only can have 3 values, and I set that up when I create the type, and that type controls the behavior later on down in the code. And then
if you squint at them really, really closely, they're actually doing the same thing.
They're doing the same thing. But here's the cool thing. When I want to change that functional code, I go back to the type and say, I used to have these 3 cases. Now I have 4. And suddenly, the whole thing blows up, and it blows up exactly where I need to fix the code. And I go and I fix all the code, and it all works fine, and nothing else crashes, and I'm good. I changed the behavior of the code.
We look at the OO side, which is now I have a 4th case, so now I create a 4th object.
A 4th object. But the linkages spin out of control quite quickly when you start talking about layered complexities. Right? It's not that you couldn't write OO code that would behave exactly the same. Or you could like wrap an enum in an object, whatever. But even if you wrapped an enum in an object, which would be the simplest way of doing it, the compiler wouldn't check to see if the enum had 3 or 4 values. It would not blow up in the same way that the compiler would tell you need to fix this stuff.
That is absolutely correct. That I will have less compiler support for it unless I am using some of the more unusual OO languages, like let's say Eiffel.
Yes. I'm not really, and I am not honestly trying to make a case for one or the other, but I think OO languages work just fine. I think the real question in an OO language is what domain is your class graph trying to model? That's how are you scoping that down? That's the issue.
Well, I have really been of the position that our languages are not the problem.
I would agree with that. I tell you what, I would agree with that, and I keep saying yes and I learned early on when somebody says yes and they're really saying screw you, but no, I don't mean it that way. You're correct, the language isn't the problem. However, I believe that the environment you program in, the IDE, the language, the office, the team, is probably, the code base is probably the most important part of growing or not growing and writing good or bad code.
Well, writing good or bad code, I would just put it down to the people.
Right. But see, the thing is, you take good people, stick them in a shitty environment, and they're going to start writing crap code. Right.
No, they will still write functioning code.
Yeah, you don't put the good apple into the barrel of bad apples to make the bad apples suddenly become good. It's sort of a downhill situation. I feel for people. You've been here too. You're coaching a team, and they're like, this code really sucks, but they won't let us clean it up. And it's just like, oh shit, wow, yeah. And,
There's actually a really, really good piece of consulting advice you can give at that point.
ooh, hit me.
It is to give every employee 4 hours per week that they can code on whatever they want to code on inside of the code base.
I like that.
So if we as a team have a problem with this section of code, we now have our budget, which is 10% of our overall budget. In fact, likely less, that we can go in and work on. And when explaining it to the business people, all that you're doing is essentially saying that we're having a second lunch.
Yeah.
And most of these people are already working much more than 8 hours per day.
Yeah, this is we talked about this. I think during the Nerd Roundup, the sort of relationship between business folks and technology teams. I don't think you can become too close to a business partner. I think the more you know about what they're doing, the more you're going to solve the problem. But I will say this: that so many things in this business, there are two sort of extremes, and you really need to know which of those goals you're shooting for, because if you just muddle it all together, it becomes a disaster. So, for instance, yes, you should be joined at the hip with a business guy as long as you're able to sit down and translate that conversation into code directly, which you should be able to do. If you start creating code bases that are non-trivial to maintain and they're confusing, it takes an hour to understand what the hell's going on, that same relationship is going to frustrate the business guy. It's you're not going to code what he wants. He's going to try to rush you along. And so at that point, he doesn't understand what you're trying to do. This 3 hour second lunch or whatever. So you have to say, okay, well, you guys take Thursday afternoons off. We have some stuff, housekeeping stuff to do around here or whatever. Greg.
I'm back.
Yeah.
I think I lost you for a second there.
So I was just saying that the thing is that if you're able to hear the guy talk and write the code, which you should be able to do, that's cool. Stays joined at the hip. If, however, it takes you 2 hours to figure out what the hell you're doing every time you change the code, and it takes you a week to compile, that relationship is no longer going to work. Plus, the more you drag this guy into your coding discussion, you're just going to frustrate the hell out of him. Tell him you're taking Thursday afternoon off for housekeeping or something. Come up with some sort of pleasant lie so that you can go do the stuff you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've worked in environments where the business understood that, a few hours per week should just be given. And I've worked in environments where we had managers that were counting how many minutes were done in a feature.
Yes, keystrokes per hour. One, a nice spot.
And what you start getting into in the latter is that you have a middle group who are normally going to be your senior developers, who are then going, well, yeah, I completely understand why it took them an extra 4 hours.
And then they're running interference. One of the things I've done that might work for you guys out there, is sit down, join hip tip, having conversations, but do that writing Gherkin features and step files, and here's how we're going to test the stuff you want. And then at the end of the conversation, perhaps an hour before lunch, you tell the guy, hey, look, we've been writing some Gherkin this morning. I need some time to clean this up so that it looks better. So the next time we go to this, we can understand what we're doing. He or she should understand that. And then you do this. You repeat that same pattern with the programming, right? It's
Yeah.
it becomes a pattern of, okay, we're going to talk about this. We're going to make things happen that are going to be really cool, but now we're going to back off and do some cleanup. And you can get in sort of a pattern of behavior like that.
What is more surprising for me is that in this discussion, we've currently fallen all the way to how do I, as a senior software engineer, hide time from the people that are above me?
Well, I don't think it necessarily. I think that once you lose trust, okay. See, there's several issues. We started with types, and it went to using types as a way to sort of pave over the idea that we don't want to have a conversation or it's unpleasant, and it just sort of goes away into the English of the code, and then some other schmuck worries about it. That's where we started, right? And then from there it went into, okay, well, how do we clean the code up? And from there it's then, okay, now your customer's an asshole. What do you do about that? And the answer to your customer's an asshole has to be, I love you guys. You guys are the best asshole customers I've ever had. And you know what? You know what? You can't be in this room anymore. Because I'm sorry, we don't allow people with suits in this room after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a rule for the fire department had this rule. I would throw complete bullshit.
Try that one. I need to try that one.
Too many people.
We do not allow people in suits in this room after 2 p.m.
I've thrown scrum masters out of their own team room, dude. Like, dude, you're not getting the hang of this. You got to go. I'm sorry, man. I hate to tell you this, but it's not working for you.
But I quite like the idea of there's no one in suits allowed after 2 p.m.
But I'll explain this for
and we go to lunch at noon and come back at 2.
I'll explain this for the more pedantic amongst you, okay? Because I want to make sure I am not teaching you to lie. I'm teaching you that the business user does not understand what the fuck you're doing. So it doesn't matter what you tell them about how you need time. You could tell them we're having giraffes come through. We got to ride around for 4 hours. It doesn't matter. They know deep in their heart it doesn't matter. So just throw it out there and let them deal with it and go on and clean the code up. Because if they can't handle trusting you, it's never going to work. Matter of fact, I'll tell you that. I'll say this a different way. I'll say this a different way. The guys who don't trust you, who are doing that count the minute deal, they're not going to believe you no matter what. Even if you're as straightforward as you possibly could be, it's still not going to work. So you might as well have fun with this thing.
But you just also gave some really, really good malicious advice.
What was it? No.
Which is, if I have no intention of ever actually working on something, this is what I should tell them.
That's true. I think at the end of the day, either you're regularly showing them stuff they want, or you've lost trust with them. And if you've lost trust, it doesn't matter what you say. They're trying to make a decision on how long to let you run along. And you might as well just have, I think the best way to deal with a lack of trust is to make a joke about it, and is to throw it back in their face and say, look, we're here all doing the same thing. Either you believe I can help you or not. And you can do that in a nice way with the fire department, whatever. Yeah.
No. The best way of dealing with a lack of trust between the business and the development side is to go out and do shots off of each other's foreheads at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, that's a true thing. I did this.
You'd be amazed how well it actually works.
It does work. That's the sad thing. There's a bonding thing that happens when you go out. It's hard to reproduce.
Well, it's also that very often you have the two sides that are kind of adversarial.
Yes. And they don't mean to be.
Getting everyone out and getting everyone to do something really, really stupid.
Yes.
Like jump into the cut open ice naked and then go drink some vodka.
So I'm specking out this system, I guess, 10 or 20 years ago. It was this huge system. It was $10, $20 million. And we were trying to figure out what in the hell does this thing do? And they were happy with it, but they wanted to replace it. So I brought in the guy who was like 65. And I asked him, like, you're the coder. How did you come up with this? And I never forget. He goes, that was back in 1991. Went out to the Holiday Inn by the Dulles Airport, drank a whole fifth of Jim Beam with the vice president. And he said, by the time we were done, we had the whole thing specced out. I'm like, oh my God. Woohoo! But
Not
they,
only spec'd out, but agreed upon.
that's correct.
And likely agreed upon even with a release date with promise of another bottle of Jim Beam.
And it ran fine for 15 years. They were just, the reason they were replacing it was because it was part of a bunch of other stuff that had to be replaced. But it was just, it was a completely honest response. It's like, okay, I can believe that. That makes sense to me.
Well, and I've watched this happen in place after place after place where, and I'm not necessarily suggesting everyone needs to go out drinking. It might be something else. It might be
Yes,
we take everyone out to go paintball.
yes.
It might be we take everyone out to
Laser tag,
go hiking.
laser tag, whirly ball. Yep.
Yeah. I actually saw one company that took everyone out to go hiking
That's
for like a 7-day trip.
I've seen the Cancun vacation where they take them to the Caribbean for a week.
Yeah, and it works.
It works, but it's weird. Because of that trust issue, it's a tough thing to sell people on that's never seen a company actually work correctly.
Yeah, but even if you want to start out with it slow, a good slow start might be we're going to have a Tuesday night party.
Yes. Oh,
and
yeah.
no one needs to be in until noon the following day.
Right. I worked with a couple companies that had the Friday afternoon beer truck that would come by.
No. You never want to do it on a Friday because
Really?
you don't get the benefit from it on a Friday. You want to do it on Tuesday.
And if you have anything involving, I do not recommend alcohol, but if you do involve things with alcohol, be sure you have taxi passes or some way for people to get home from whatever they're doing. Okay, so we've learned some valuable lessons here. One is that we cannot stay on a damn topic to save our life. But no, I think we kind of beat this to death. There's the extreme of DDD. There's the extreme of just do the most minimal thing possible. If you just try to use primitives all the time, you're really going to screw up quickly. If you do DDD all the time, I believe you're also going to screw up, but it's not going to become apparent to you till way, way down the road. I think that's one of the reasons it became popular, is that you can demonstrate this really cool thing called DDD, and it's not evident to the people you're teaching that, yeah, those little edge cases kind of start hurting you like 2 years from now, not the next week.
Well, and it's the vast majority of software does not require the thought involved with DDD.
Right. That's kind of sad. And I think that many times we go to the polymorphism with the subtypes, we go to inheritance system, we use all of this stuff because we can, because it's cool, because we can, and somebody told us this, so we could do this, and it's awesome.
Well, when all I really needed to do was just customize some CSS on an existing PHP program.
Well, I started writing an app the other day. I've been playing one of these little matching games where you match up the little jewels on my phone.
Okay.
And I'm like, I can write this. And I thought about how I wanted to write it. And as always, I went to this sort of pie in the sky thing. I finally just said, I just need 2 text boxes and a button. Width, height, button.
Wait. Do tell me that. So you have your phone that you have to match up the jewels on.
Right.
So what you did was you put a camera in front of it. And then you started writing things that actually use the webcam video coming in order to move things to touch things on your phone. Right?
Now, you got to build the giant robot would be the first step to this. And then the robot would build the webcam. No, that's my point. So the place I picked to start was a blank HTML page, 2 text boxes and a button with height, with default values already in. Hit the button, it makes a default grid. That's a function. It does a clear thing, yes, no, and then I can do a grid with stuff. Then I can do a grid where you match things. And it's a simple progression of simple ideas that primitives should be fine with. That compare and contrast that to the way I would have done it maybe 15 years ago. I would immediately start building a domain model. I would have done model view model or some kind of thing where I set a model up on the back end, the front end has the same model, and I'm using React and all. Yeah, maybe at some point, but not right now. No, I don't need that. So unless the behavior forces me to add something, I'm not going to add it.
And I believe I said this before, but one really good way of getting out of this problem is to go write some code in C.
Yes, it forces you to focus. The old
Or
timers.
assembler.
Well,
Assembler is even more
yeah.
focused.
Well, and I think the old timers here have a point, and I think the young guys toss it off too quickly. It's Markham on day we coded with switches. That's not really what they're saying. What they're saying is by forcing me to go slow back in the day, I had to think through a lot more than I did code. I thought a lot more than I coded, and that made my code better.
Until we got into your 1.4 thousand line function, which was heavily optimized.
Yeah, of course you unrolled all the loops in that as well. Assembler. You added inline assembler with the loops unrolled, even better.
Oh, of course you need to do this.
Yeah, it is. What do they call it? Eating your own dog food. It makes you a better person when you have to go in and maintain some of that old obfuscated C. It's like, oh my god, yeah. Hmm. But the thing is, I think it's kind of ironic. That we fix that by building abstraction layers
I
on
still
top.
support quite a bit of C code
That's what I'm going to
that
say.
I've written.
And we're still down in the damn code doing it.
Well, no. What makes me laugh about it is almost a 50-50 distribution of when I go into that code of, oh my god, I was a complete idiot, versus, holy crap, I was a genius. I have to realize what I was actually doing then.
Wow. I got code with you more, Greg, because I'm like 100%. Who is this idiot that coded this stuff?
No, I know. I will find code that's doing things that I don't even remember that I did.
Yeah, it goes back to
It's
that
like
alcohol
you
encoded
find
piece,
like
isn't
all
it?
these weird interactions with a video card, and you're like, did I actually do that? I don't even remember doing that.
So I never wrote a bug in a line of code I didn't write. Wise words, my friend. All right, so let's wrap this up. I appreciate you coming, Greg. Like I said, this is try to do the technical stuff, see how it works. I think we're going to need like a task master, somebody with a whip. But it's been a good first step. Did you have fun?
Absolutely.
Cool beans. So thanks for dropping by, guys. It's the end of recording.